What's up, everyone? We're all set up with a Next.js project, but now you're wondering how you should organize and structure your project. In this video, I'm going to highlight the key features of a Next.js project structure and suggest some ways that you can organize your project. It may be helpful to first go over the different folder and file conventions that make up Next.js. There are only 3 top-level folders available to you in the Next.js app router: app, public, and the optional source directory. If you choose to use the source directory, your app folder will live inside this one, and public will be kept outside. All your static assets like images, fonts, and the like should be stored in your top-level public folder. Top-level files include things like your configuration file for Next.js and TypeScript, middleware, project dependencies and scripts, environment variables, and instructions for Git to ignore files and folders. Many of these files will be used as we continue to dive deeper into the different aspects of Next.js. Routing files are used in navigation around your project. This will include things like the layout or template of a route, as well as the page loading UI not found in error files. We covered layout and page.tsx files in my Getting Started with Next.js video, and we'll cover more as we go. Nested routes are used to add an extra layer to your URL path. For example, if you wanted to create a route called info, we could do that by adding a new directory to our app called info. To nest this route segment even deeper, we can add another new directory and call this about. Now, in order for this to work, we do need to add a new file that we'll call page.tsx, and if you remember, this is the required name for this file, and we can just export a default function called page, which will return an h1 that says this will be local host 3000 info about, and it's a nested route. So now when we run pnpm dev, we can load up our local host /info/about. And now when we load this up, we see the h1 that says this will be local host info/about, a nested route. We'll talk more about dynamic routes or segments in a future video, but dynamic route segments, catch-all route segments, and optional catch-all route segments enable you to use dynamic content for your slugs and routes. So as an example, we will go to our app directory, and we're going to create a new directory called slug wrapped in square brackets. Inside this directory, we're going to add a new page.tsx file, and we can export a default async function which takes our params, and we can create a constant that destructures our params and gets our slug by awaiting our params, and we can return an h1 that will say slug. So now we can save this, and we can just type in anything into this URL, and we can see that the slug is returned. If you want to organize your routes into groups to make your project more readable and manageable, you can do that by using route groups. Route groups do not affect your routing, so having a route for something like front end with parentheses around it will not add front end to your URL path. So let's add that front end directory, just as I said, with a set of parentheses surrounding it. So we can add front end, and then we can drag our slug into our front end route group, and we can see if we refresh this page, nothing changes, nothing breaks. Now, if you want a folder and its child segments to be excluded from routing, you can do that by using an underscore at the beginning of the folder. Let's change this front end directory that we just created, and we're going to rename it to remove the parentheses and add an underscore. When we refactor this, we no longer have access to the info route because this is now a private segment. This can be useful for separating UI logic from routing logic, as well as sorting and grouping files that are not meant to be included in the router. Parallel and intercepted routes allow you to create things like a login modal while still maintaining a login route. This is advanced functionality that we'll come back to and demonstrate later on. Next.js also supports the standard metadata files, things like icons, Open Graph, and SEO files. You can include favicon, icon, and Apple icon files, and both the icon and Apple icon files can be generated using code. While you're able to set Open Graph using code, you can provide images called Open Graph Image and Twitter Image to explicitly set a file as your Open Graph or Twitter image for a route. And lastly, you're able to set sitemaps and robots files for your project or specific routes. This can be done statically with a sitemap.xml or robots.txt, or programmatically, which I cover in a video about the Payload CMS SEO plugin. A link to that video is in the description. If you're finding this video helpful and informative, please make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you never miss when I release content about Next.js, Payload CMS, Tailwind CSS, and more. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up as well, because your engagement helps this channel grow. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to it. By default, Next.js isn't opinionated about how you organize your project. Files in the app router are able to be co-located, so you can have your components and routing logic all in the app folder without the risk of any collisions as long as you maintain the proper file naming conventions. While it isn't opinionated, there are features that can help you choose how to organize your files. First of all, the special files are rendered in a specific order, with the page.tsx file always being rendered last. So if we, using our terminal, go to our source app directory, we can add all of our special files using touch. So first is layout.tsx. This, as I mentioned, wraps around everything below it, including nested routes. The template.tsx file does roughly the same thing, but it re-renders the layout with fresh information. Error.tsx is the React error boundary, which is where you can add custom error logic to your app. This is followed by loading.tsx, which is the React suspense boundary. This is where you'll be able to add things like skeletons and other loading animations. The notfound.tsx file comes next, and this is your 404 response page. Finally, page.tsx is rendered unless there is another nested layout.tsx file. So we'll go ahead and create all of these files, and we'll see that our layout and page.tsx were undisturbed, but all of the rest of the files were created for us. These files are all rendered recursively. If you only include your layout and loading.tsx files, and then include a nested route like admin with its own layout.tsx error and loading files, that means your parent route will render its layout and loading.tsx file first, then it'll go down into the admin route and render its files in the same order. This will be true for every layer down that you nest. Nested folders are what define route structure in Next.js. Each folder represents a segment that's mapped to its corresponding segment in a path. These routes are not publicly accessible until you include a page.tsx or route.ts file in the segment. Even then, only returned content is what's sent to the client. So that means you can include project files like constants, components, and databases without fear of the content in these files being sent to the client. You don't have to co-locate files in your app directory if you don't want to. You can either store them in top-level folders or alongside your app directory in the source folder. I prefer to have a top-level source directory, which then has my app, payload blocks, collections, and globals, components, and utilities. Do what works best for you and how you organize yourself, though. If it makes you feel even more secure, you can use the private folders I mentioned earlier to ensure that files aren't made routable in those files and folders. One of my favorite features in Next.js is the route groups. You can use a set of parentheses like I showed to separate your file structure into different groupings that make sense to you. For example, I can create a front-end directory for all of my front-end files and a payload directory for all of my payload files. Within my front-end directory, I can include an account and auth directory that separates my user account files from my user authentication files. The use cases are endless for route groups. When you use a route group, a new segment is not added to your URL path. This is just one method of organizing your project. How you organize your project is ultimately up to you and how your brain organizes files. Do what works best for you. I've highlighted a few features here that outline what each grouping of files and folders do, which I hope will inform you in your decision to keep things organized. At the very least, I would encourage you to have route groups for your front-end and back-end logic, and to keep your components out of your app folder unless there is a specific need for a component only in one internal route, like a logout button in your user account route. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content around Next.js, Payload CMS, Tailwind CSS, and more. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.